And when we talk about the data types are the most basic thing to start off with because it's what you're going to be dealing with data as you make queries and as you handle different like loops and functions. It all handles data. And when we talk about data and the data types, there are really three basic types we want to go over for this video. That's going to be an integer, which is a number. So something like -10, right? You can type that in. -10, that's an integer. We can type in 5, that is an integer, or any other whole number, 100. And so integer is really just a whole number. Now, once you add a decimal point and you add, say, -10.0, that becomes a floating point number. So that's your second data type. A floating point number is anything with a decimal. So I can take -10, an integer, and turn it into a floating point by just typing -10.0 or -10.01234. That's an integer. And then the third data type that we'll be dealing a lot with are strings. And strings are just text, right? So these will be text values that are called strings. And strings are usually going to be enclosed in quotes. And you can use a double quote and say something like corgi, that's a string. Or you can use a single quote and type corgi, right? So I've displayed here on my terminal using the Python shell. I just typed in Python 3. That's what I have installed on my Mac. And I've typed and showed you an integer value, a floating point, and also a string. Now the string could be empty as well. So a string is it's like it doesn't have to be a single word. It could be even a sentence, right? So you can say, I have a 1-year old corgi at home. There's my string. So anything enclosed in the quotes, right? So I'll kind of clear this screen and this a string will start and end with the quote. You just want to be sure to include that. That's always important. The integer and the floating point, they don't have quotes around them. If you put a quote around an integer, say if you do this, that is now a string. It's no longer an integer. So if you add a quote to a number, quotes around a number, it becomes a string. Anything with a quote becomes a string. And even if you did 5.0, you take a floating point, put that into quotes, that's a string. And so just remember, you've got the three data types. There's the integer, a whole number, floating point, which includes a decimal, and then your string characters. Now, it is possible to add strings together. Like in Python, they call that concatenation. Always have a hard time saying that word. But what that would really mean is taking two strings and putting it together. What that would look like is I could use my name, and let's say I want to add my last name to it. So I'll use uh, an operator, which is the addition here, and then I'll type in the other string. And so if you look at this statement right here, how would you think this would actually come together? Probably not the way you originally would think, just going through grade school and understanding how you put sentences together. It actually just combines them together. And so if I'm talking about my first name and last name, there needs to be a space in there. And so remember, I talked about having a string with nothing in it, an empty string. So you could do the concatenation, but you would include an empty string. So in there, I have a space, and then I'm just adding another string. So there's three strings being added together. And so now I get a single string with that space in there. So having being able to put strings together will also be useful as we move along in this journey for network automation, putting sentences together where you could say have a phrase like, here's how many interfaces this router has, and then you would concatenate a variable there. And so we'll talk about variables. And when we talk about concatenation, before while I'm on this topic, you cannot add a string and an integer. It's just not going to work. And so when you do that, you'll have an error. So if I try to say my name twice, right? You just want to say it twice. Roel, Roel. So we have this string here. We're going to concatenate an integer. Python does not allow that. And so there you go. It's saying traceback. Usually traceback just means there's an error somewhere, and it's pointing out to line 1. So if you had this in a script and there was this traceback error, it would tell you where in the line number of your script you have this problem, and it actually tells you here you can only concatenate string, not integer to string, right? But what's interesting to me with Python is you could multiply it. You can multiply a string. You just can't concatenate a string and an integer. So I can say Roel times 2, right? So this is the multiplication operator or expression here. And so Roel times 2. And that would actually print out my name twice, Roel, Roel. Kind of interesting. Not sure how that works out. I don't know how I would use this yet in a future script, but we'll see. The other thing to note is concatenating an integer and a float. And so if we wanted to do 5 plus 5.0, that will turn it into a float, 10.0. And so how do I know what this all means? Like how do you know it's what data type it is? I will go into this later, but there is something called there's a built-in function called type. And so if I say I'll get into that. Let's talk about variables first, because I do want to use the variables, and then we'll talk about determining the kind of data type. So variables will be used quite a bit, right? Variables, they have they're used widely, and you want to place values into a variable, and then you use that variable in your script. You call it out different times. So in what I've seen with scripting is you could create or make a get request. So if I'm going to query a cloud API and I want to determine how many access points there are at a site, I need to put that response that the API will give me into something so I could use it later on.